The decline of religious affiliation, accompanied by organic secularization, can be a good thing.
Religious affiliation is the better response to the pressures of secularization.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Jerry Lutz. We're glad that you're here and joining us on an important topic today. Let's meet our panelists first.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hello, my name is Mel Robeck. I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God, and I serve the church at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, as senior professor of church history and ecumenics and a special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations.
Hi, my name is Tony Matthews, and I'm the senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Our topic today has to do with secularism. Recently, Phil Zuckerman, associate dean at Pitzer College, wrote an article in the LA Times titled, "Why America's Record Godlessness is a Good Thing." Recent polls have pointed to the decline of religious affiliation in the United States. Such a fact worries many, especially those who take their faith seriously. Zuckerman cites a statistic that in 1990, 63% of Americans confidently believed in the existence of God. Today, it's 53%. The decline does not originate in coercive secularization, such as one finds in authoritarian states, but rather it's emerged organically in a country where religious liberty and human rights are respected. He argues that it's a logical outcome of good education, prosperity, safety, personal security, peaceful lives, availability of health care, and the like. Easy access to the internet has broadened perspectives and worldviews as well. When he lifts up various social issues, he contends that secular people are more supportive than people of faith are when it comes to such things as science, reproductive rights, universal health care, LGBTQ+ issues, environmental protections, death with dignity, and gun safety legislation. Therefore, organic secularization is a good that does not postpone rewards to eternity. Given this opening statement, we'd like to hear our panelists consider the following questions. 1, do you agree with Dr. Zuckerman's conclusion that organic secularization is a good thing? 2, do you agree with the idea that hard times keep us close to God while God becomes expendable when things are going well? 3, are people of faith less interested in addressing social issues? Why or why not? And we begin our discussion with Mel.
Thank you. I can't say that I'm a fan of secularization, but I do think sometimes secularization can be a good thing, in that it sometimes points religious organizations and churches in particular to areas that they have either forgotten or they have grown cold on or they've changed their mind on, and it makes me wonder why they do what they do. If I think about all the kinds of factors that Zuckerman lifted up, everything from religious liberty, it was churches that brought that into this country. It was they that pushed that kind of mentality. Human rights is something that people of faith, Judeo-Christian tradition have pushed for human rights for centuries. Good education in most of the major universities in the United States, especially the early ones, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, so forth, they were all established by religious organizations for their own people and training of pastors and so forth. Think about health care, and all you have to think about is the Adventists, or you think about the Mormons, or you think about, Catholics have an enormous health care system. I think we have really an important part of contribution of all these things that come from religious people. Even Earth Day, which was founded by a Pentecostal, which people wouldn't tend to think of that because it's an environmental issue. But I do think that sometimes our faith gets in trouble when we forget the reality of why we are here. It's not simply that all those nice things took place in the past. We hope that they continue in the future. But there are new kinds of things that face us all the time. And it's there where I think we have a real responsibility to listen to the secular culture, or those people who have, in a sense, left the faith because they felt the faith wasn't responding to the kinds of issues that are being raised by people today. And gun control is a very interesting one, because there are a lot of people, I would say, in a sense, more people that are not religious that think it's important to control weapons. And certainly, if you were to, as some of the recent polls have suggested, that the Democrats have left religion far more rapidly than the Republicans have, it certainly seems to me that we have a case there that the Democratic Party has picked up this social role that Christians should at least have discussion with. Death with dignity. Everybody wants people to die with dignity, but the question is how you define that, and how fast or how slow, and whether one aids or one doesn't. Environmentalism is another one. LGBTQ plus rights, universal health care. I mean, how can people who are religious be opposed to kind of universal health care? Well, it costs money, that's why. But, we have to think about these things. If I think about these things theologically, I have a very difficult time. I do think that sometimes this secularization comes about, in a sense, because we have succeeded so well in terms of religious liberty and human rights and education and health care and all of these kinds of things. And I do think that, in that second question, I think the response has to be that, in fact, people do keep close to God when they feel like they need God. But they don't necessarily stay close to God when they can do it themselves. And I worry about the bifurcation between these two issues. I think we really need to keep in mind both God and what the secular society has brought about in terms of consciousness raising, at the very least.
Thank you, Mel. Dan?
So I resonate so much, Mel, with what you share, but I think that there's a part of me that also thinks about how all of these different elements that were brought up that I think are part of the pressures of the secular society are really humanistic values. And humanism, I think, in many ways is the counterbalance to fundamentalism. But I think the danger of humanism is that you end up creating the greatest idolatry of all, which is the worship of the self, or the worship of the human form. And I find that to be actually quite dangerous. What I think, the reason why I asserted at the beginning that religious affiliation is the better response is because what religious affiliation does from the beginning is it paves an even foundation of core moral holy values on which one can build a life and through which one can address all of those secular concerns. But when I think about how I respond to all of those questions that you raised about gun safety or healthcare or science or reproductive rights or LGBTQ+ or healthcare, any of these different moral challenges, I resonate to those challenges because of the religious upbringing that I had. And because I am part of a religious community that constantly asks me to think about, what are you caring about? What are you concerned with? What is of ultimate value to you? And what I worry about is that if we shed religious ideologies, then how do we ever inculcate these foundational values that are causing our secular culture to want to address these core human moral issues? And I think that we need to go a little bit deeper to make sure that we don't go too far in one direction.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate the contribution that both of you have made. And I do think that humanism is an idolatrous position because it raises me to be the ultimate arbiter of everything, and that it is important. Religion paves the way, as you said, for us to understand that the self is not that. But what we need, I think, to answer the questions that are brought up by this article and that you so cogently stated, Dr. Robeck, is a religion that's open, a religion that's free, a religion that soars. And frankly, you know, we have religious imagery that helps us do that. The understanding of the presence of the Spirit of God helps us to move beyond our awkward boxes that we always try to create for God. You know, every time humanity has sought through its religious piety to capture God, God has slipped away. So we need a spirit that we as human beings need a spirit that is informed by that God who is always bringing a new thing to be.
Tony.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that my colleagues have said. When I saw the program, I immediately grappled with the title of the article written by Dr. Zuckerman, Why America's Record Godlessness is a Good Thing. Right away, I couldn't wrap my mind around that to initially give it some thought, because if what he means by this statement is that, and if what he means by organic secularization, if he is saying that godlessness is better than godliness, I wholeheartedly disagree with that. It's just, I can't agree with that. And in one article, the same author, Zuckerman, writes, and it may be the same article here, he said, fears that this rise of irreligion might result in the deterioration of our nation's moral fiber and threaten our liberties and freedoms are understandable. And then he says this, such concerns are not without historical merit. So he even acknowledges that when you live in a godlessness society, it's dangerous. He goes on to cite the former Soviet Union was a communist country, and he says that they were deeply rooted in atheism, and that resulted in one of the most corrupt, bloody regimes of the 20th century. And then he points out that Cambodia and Albania were also atheistic societies, and how those societies were equally crooked and vicious. So the whole title of the article, Godliness is a Good Thing, I don't know how that is. I'm having a hard time theologically wrapping my mind around that concept. Now, can people who are not godly do good things? Absolutely. But does that mean that they're godly? I grapple with it. I would just have to say that, religious, as Dr. Robeck pointed out earlier, contributions have come from the religious communities, and we've made significant contributions. And I just think that any nation that is godless is underwhelming.
Thanks, Tony. Dan?
So I would agree with that, and I would go a step further. I think there's a false dichotomy here, where they're saying that you either choose godliness or secularism, but he's equating godliness with fundamental religiosity. And fundamentalism is something that I think scares a lot of people. because they take a look at fundamental expressions of religion, and it doesn't matter which it is. It can be fundamental Christianity, fundamental Islam, fundamental Judaism, and they say, well, those folks are anti-modern, those folks are anti-rational, those folks are not willing to acknowledge the real world in which we live. Feh. I don't want to have anything to do with that. So if the choice is that or secularism, I'm going to pick secularism. But what I think is missing is that there's this huge religious middle that teaches modern expressions of religious ideologies that remind us that there is an idea of God, an energy in the universe that is where we find the source of all of the moral goods that humanists embrace. Love, life, knowledge, wisdom, justice, compassion, awe, wonder, generosity, freedom, peace. That those values are where I find my own moral bearings. They come from my religious belief. They come from my textual reading. They come from religious inculcation. Otherwise, you're looking for spontaneous righteousness, and you may be waiting a long time to have a whole society become spontaneously righteous. And as you said, Tony, the atheistic societies have visited more moral hurt on the world in the 20th century than any religious society.
Tom?
Yeah. Well, fundamentalist societies have wreaked a lot of havoc as well, both in the larger world and in our country. That notion that we understand what the best is and there is no conversation, and if you don't agree, you're not only out, but you are evil and worthy of punishment. That leads us down a totalitarian road that we don't want to go down either. So yes, there is, we religious folk must always be standing up and saying, no, that stuff over there that you're trying to define as us, that's not all of us, that's just some of them over there in the corner. Please don't disregard all of us because of that. Frankly, I think that's one of the things we're able to do on this program, is to show folks that there is a wide variety of religious expression and religious opinion that approaches all the issues in our society in very different ways, but can do so in a manner that is mutually helpful and is ultimately peaceful.
Mel?
Yeah, I was thinking about what Dan had said about humanism in the first place. I mean, I think that plays an important role here, but it's not all negative. Humanism by the reformers was viewed as a way of helping people understand that every individual has something significant to give. That you can trust the human being to be able to give something like that. And I think Luther's understanding vocation comes out of that. I think that Erasmus really pushed this very, very strongly. He was clearly a humanist. John Calvin was a humanist in very real ways. And so I think that they saw ways for the church to say, we can be a humanistic church without going to the secular ideology in such a way that we've undercut who we are and what we believe. And I agree that there's a real troublesome idea here if we connect godliness, or I should say godlessness, with lack of church going. I think, spirituality is much broader than church attendance, and we'll maybe see that in the coming weeks. But the reality is, I think, that when people do separate themselves from the religious organization, coming back to you, Dan, it is, I think, the best way to inculcate the kinds of concerns that we have and substantive responses to those concerns. So, I had a mixed feeling, but I have to say that when I read Zuckerman's article, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I want to even look at this. And yet at the same time, I thought, this is worth a discussion.
Let's go to a break, and we'll be right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
And we are anxious to hear your comments, so please write. And we appreciate the sponsorship of the Town Hall organization. We're going to recap or summarize now, and we're looking forward to hearing this on a subject of organic secularization. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. I want to speak to those of you who are out there who consider yourself godly, who consider yourself affiliated. And that is to say that we need to pay attention. The folks that have left, the folks that are leaving, the folks that are bad-mouthing, it's because they have not sensed the dynamism of the Spirit of God in us. If you will go to, for instance, the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, and understand that there are two conversions that take place there. It's not just Philip converting this Ethiopian eunuch, but Philip is being converted as well. All of us in the religious community need to understand ourselves worked upon by the Spirit of God at all times, and changed and moved and developed and grown.
Mel?
Yes, I was thinking about fundamentalism here, and there are all different kinds of fundamentalisms, as Dan has spelled them out. All kinds of religions have their own fundamentalism, but I think in Christian fundamentalism we do have that tendency to write off an enormous amount of what I would call the humanistic invention, the kinds of things that people just using their mind, their rationality, their logic, their gifts, their science. We tend to be very skeptical of that until time goes by. And inevitably, it does go by. But the reality is, I think the first kind of response is often a knee-jerk response that's opposed to this and opposed to that, and we can't talk about this and so forth, and it may put off a generation or two or even 100 years before we get around to finally talking about what was really a problem back here a long time ago. I think the church has an enormous responsibility to stay in touch with the kinds of issues that people are raising. I totally agree with Tom here that when people leave, they leave for a reason, and often it's because we have not responded adequately or effectively to the questions that they need to have answered.
Tony?
Yeah, you have to scratch where it itches.
Yes.
Where it itches. Question 3, are people of faith less interested in addressing social issues? I think we're more interested, and in particular over the last several years with what we've seen. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is when Jesus says that we are the salt of the earth. We're not the salt of the salt shaker, we're the salt of the earth. We have to get the salt out of the salt shaker into society and minister to people and meet their needs. And I think that's a very critical part of what the church is about, and we ought to do it. And I think the church can do a very good job in touching the whole person, and we hope we can get there.
Thank you. Dan?
Secularization is born from the idea that I can make a moral judgment without the bedrock of religious faith. And that promoted the whole idea of humanistic inquiry. But what I think is missing is the idea that a human being's life is of ultimate and infinite worth is a religious idea that comes from religious understandings, that the ultimate values that we think give human life its meaning and its worth, for which we use as the rational basis for moral judgments, are religious truths that have been inculcated for centuries. And I think the thing is, how do we as religious people, live in dialogue with the larger culture and world in which we live by saying we have something to learn from each other. There's a passage that I was learning recently where a Hasidic commentator was saying, you need to figure out how you can find, the Hebrew word is seichel, the organic wisdom that lives even in the natural world. As you walk through, you go out, you walk your dog, right? And you hear all of the sounds of the world around you. What is the wisdom that you can learn from all of these things that we would think of as just being bedrock of our human experience? And the more that we can realize that we have wisdom to learn from the other, whether that other is the secular world in which we live or the natural world in which we live, beyond religious text, we will grow in our sense of wisdom and understanding.
Thank you. We are excited to have this subject. I just keep thinking that, that we as Christians or as people of faith have a real responsibility, as I think Tom said beautifully, to be the Spirit-led people that the world will see as the leaders in all the issues of caring for one another in the way that I think the Bible beginning to end describes. And I like your list, but it was so partial. Thank you for mentioning the Seventh-day Adventists, but the Episcopals have a health system, and the Roman Catholics and the Jewish nation, all of these have health care, and we are committed to life. Mm-hmm. So, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. The rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. Now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you. Until